We are continuing on our next segment of note-taking for poetry. You should have either your interactive notebook opened up to the notes, should already be filled in up here with prose versus poetry, and today you're going to be taking notes on form. Otherwise, if you're online, you should be open in Google Classroom to this document and you'll be filling in the notes for the yellow. Now, as we go through these and look at some examples, please make sure that you're really looking at what the examples are and what I'm saying to identify them, because you will be having a quiz over these 5 elements. And I'm not making you take a whole lot of notes yourself so that you can focus on what I'm saying. So use this as a process to make sure that you're learning what we're going through. That will save you some time as far as studying comes in later. So we are going through 5 elements of poetry to analyze a poem and really help us get to know its meaning a little bit better. And there are 5. We're going to start with form today. So there's no trick to these names. Form is exactly what it means. The form of something is the way something is shaped. So when we talk about form in poetry, we're talking about the way the poem looks when it's actually on the page. And we have 2 different ways that we categorize poems. We could say, first of all, that it's free verse. And when we think about something free, it's not, it doesn't have a consistent pattern. It doesn't have a way that it has to be set up. So there's no consistent pattern when we look at a free verse poem. You are filling in the word consistent in your notes. If it's not free verse, then it's structured, which means, of course, then it is going to have a consistent pattern. And it's a pattern that's there on purpose. The author wrote his poem intending for that pattern to be there. It's not accidental. And so when we look at the patterns, one type of pattern might be the shape of something. So I have seen poems that were written where the words make the outline of a cloud, and then little words drip down from the cloud, kind of like raindrops. That form was not accidental. The author created that pattern, created that structure on purpose. Okay, so that we'd say that the form of that poem is structured. Another type of structure might have to do with rhyme or rhythm. When you hear a beat that you can tap your foot to, that's not accidental. The author worked very hard to set up his syllables in a way that create that rhythm. Or if you see rhyming words at the ends of the lines, we're going to talk a little more specifically later about these rhyme schemes. But when you see that rhyme, it's not accidental. The author purposely put those rhymes there in that place. And so that makes a pattern, meaning that its form is structured. We might see a way that the lines are grouped in stanzas. If we see 2 lines together and then a space, and then another 2 lines and then a space, we can see that those stanzas each have 2 lines in them, and it's repeated throughout the entire poem. It's not an accident. The author set that pattern up, so we would say that it is structured. And when we look at stanzas, there are different types of stanzas that can be set up. So a couplet is a stanza that has 2 lines together. A lot of times, stanzas that are couplets rhyme. Sometimes there might be 3 lines to a stanza. We call that a tercet. Sometimes there could be 4 lines with a stanza. We call that a quatrain. So when we look at that spacing, normally when we think about like regular writing, we look at a paragraph that's indented, and that's how we know a new paragraph starts. When we look at a poem, we look at the empty space that's between a line, and that makes up a stanza. And if our poem is set up with repeated stanzas that have 4 lines in them, then we know that that author intended that pattern and it's structured. So when we look here, we can see the structure of this poem has the words making the shape of a flower, and around the outside he used adjectives and nouns that have to do with flowers. That is structured. That's not an accident. The author wrote his poem in that specific form. Here you see a poem that has 4 lines and then 3 lines and then 3 lines and then 4 lines. And we don't necessarily hear a rhythm when I read. I don't talk. My lips part and air pushes out. But the sound must not fit because my thoughts are so big. So I don't try to talk. My thoughts must be too good for words, for the air, for my lips. When I read that poem, you don't hear a rhythm. We don't hear a pattern of rhyme. So we would call this poem a free verse. So as we look at poetry, one of the things that we're going to look at is its form, and we're going to categorize it in one of two ways. Either the poem is free verse, and we have to explain why, or the poem is structured, and we would have to explain why using some of this terminology.